Spotlighting Hawaii's leaders.
We want to bring in Governor David Ige.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Lieutenant Governor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Mayor Derek Kawakami.
Thank you so much, Senator, for being here.
Spotlighting the issues.
Where is the virus right now in our community?
How much is this overall going to cost the state?
How are you responding to the community's concerns? Talk about the level of citations that you guys are writing.
Spotlight Hawaii with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Longstrugs.
Hello and good morning. Thanks for tuning in here on this Wednesday morning. I'm Ryan Kalei Suji, joined by Yunji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. This morning, we are spotlighting an issue that we've been talking about, especially during this campaign season, with many who are running for office and talking about the future about housing here in Hawaii and how affordable housing and just the overall problem is being suffered by many in our communities, especially with those of our younger generations who are looking to own and live here in Hawaii.
Yeah, home ownership is out of reach for so many in our community, particularly people who are just starting off. And we hear a lot about the brain drain and the cost that has to our state overall. So we've invited Zachary Yamada, who's the co-founder and board member of an organization called Housing Hawaii's Future, along with Sterling Higa, who is now the executive director of that group. Welcome, both of you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yep,
so Zach, I want to start with you because you are the co-founder. How did this organization come about, and tell us about the idea behind it?
Yeah, gladly. We began working on what would eventually become Housing Hawaii's Future in January of 2021. I know we were in the throes of the pandemic at that time, and I'd graduated a semester early from undergrad, and so I was back in Hawaii waiting to start my job on the mainland. And so I wanted to use this unique opportunity and window of time to try to do something that would positively impact the community. And I was fortunate enough to be connected with Colbert Matsumoto. And together we decided to study the issue of the housing crisis. And so during this discovery period, we researched this well-documented issue, interviewed many key stakeholders in the housing space, and then studied past and present efforts of reform in this space. And ultimately, we came to the conclusion that what was needed was not another report or another opinion piece, but actually an organization with a longer vision, not to support a single project or a single piece of legislation, where you would gather a group of people together, activate them, and then they would kind of dissipate, but one that rallies the community to address these systemic issues of housing, and particularly puts young people front and center in the issue, giving them the resources and the education to fight for an issue that, they're personally impacted by and, care deeply about. And so we believe that this model of sustained engagement hasn't been tried in the housing space before. And so ultimately, our vision is that any local who works hard and wants quality housing in Hawaii will be able to find it.
Yeah, a very important issue. Sterling, if you can share a little more about your role and more about the organization and what you folks have been able to accomplish over these past few years.
Sure. So my role is executive director, and our organization is really focused on outreach and education and then leadership development. So in terms of that outreach and education, our primary goal is to equip the next generation with the knowledge and skills they need to address our housing crisis. So we focus on reaching stakeholders across the state and have reached more than 1,000 concerned citizens for face-to-face or, because of the pandemic, face-to-screen interactions like this one. So in the last months, we've spoke with 19 of the 33 neighborhood boards on Oahu, reaching more than 600 people. We've also been able to meet with students, young locals, business and community leaders from Maui, Kauai, and Hawaii Island. And our goal there is to help develop leaders. So we're partnering with universities and young professional groups to foster civic engagement in the next generation. So last fall, we piloted our From Hawaii for Hawaii Club Challenge for college and university Hawaii clubs on the continent. Creighton University, Chapman University, Brown University, and Arizona State University collectively raised about $2,500 for local housing nonprofits like Hawaiian Community Assets, the Institute for Human Services, and Pu'uhonua Hawaiianai. Our goal with that project was to show that even though students are 2,500 or more miles away, they can still be involved in supporting the efforts of nonprofits that are working on the ground to address local housing needs, everything from temporary shelter to financial education to building homes. And this fall, we're repeating that challenge. So if anyone watching is part of a Hawaii club and would like to join, they can email me at sterling@hawaiisfuture.org. This summer, we're partnering with the Jordan and Kara Odo Scholarship Foundation for their Next Gen Leaders Summer Program. So 16 undergraduate and graduate students will spend the next 6 weeks learning from experts, researching the affordable housing issue, and proposing solutions. And at the end of the 6 weeks, their projects will be evaluated by a panel of local business and community leaders. So these are some of the things we're working on, and we're excited to partner with other organizations that would like to focus on advancing solutions to our housing crisis.
Zach, I'm interested to know a little bit more about the findings that you did in the research that you did, and tell us about how this issue particularly impacts young people and why that matters to those of us who may not be so young.
Yeah, I think, quite frankly, young people look out and see a bleak kind of future for themselves. And, with median family home prices in excess of $1 million, we touched upon that, home ownership feels out of reach for most. And so our focus groups and research has uncovered that housing is the biggest issue holding people back from living and creating a life for themselves in Hawaii. This forces people in their early 20s to make, a very difficult and important decision of where they want to take the education that they've acquired and the skills and social capital, and where are they going to take it? Are they going to reinvest it? Are they able to reinvest it in the islands, or do they have to look for opportunities elsewhere? And so I know I fall squarely in that category of somebody who was raised in Hawaii, educated in Hawaii, but after undergrad, I started my career on the mainland. And also I would like to add that, we're focusing in this question particularly on young people, but I think the group of affected individuals is a lot larger, more socially, more economically, and more geographically diverse than, you might initially think. For example, there's the college diaspora that Sterling has referred to, but also, growing families who live in apartments and, have a few children and want to move to a single family home. And then, forever renters who can't take that next step in the housing ladder because there's nothing affordable for them. And then that kind of constrains the ability for the next generation to come in and be able to rent for themselves.
Sterling, I'm wondering if you can share a little more about what specifically you folks might be calling for or proposing. This is, of course, an issue and topic that many have tackled over the last few years and decades, really, and trying to resolve this through various ideas and opinions, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of progress being made. What are some of the things that you folks are suggesting that might be different from what others have heard?
Yeah, apologies for the long answer to follow, but broadly, we need our governor, mayors, legislature, county councils, community and business leaders to come together and address workforce housing needs. There are many government programs and advocacy groups that focus on low-income housing needs and the houselessness issue, which are very important issues, but there are few programs designed to ensure housing for the middle class. In terms of policies, there are three basic things that our government can do. The first thing government can do is to provide resources, including land, infrastructure, and financing. So state and county governments have land, including Department of Education schools that have closed or shrunk because of low enrollment, and we should consider using these sites to develop workforce housing. Government can also invest in the infrastructure that supports workforce housing development, roads, sewers, telecommunication, and everything else that makes housing possible. And where affordable and workforce housing projects don't pencil out, state government can step in to help finance the development and preservation of workforce housing, like it does through the Hawaii Housing Finance and Development Corporation. The second broad category of things government can do is to reform entitlements and permitting. So the current process is bureaucratic and inefficient, and a recent UHERO report indicated that our counties suffer some of the most burdensome regulations in the country. The time and uncertainty caused by these regulations add risk and cost to development, pushing prices out of the range that hardworking local families can afford. And this is not to say that we should eliminate safety and environmental standards and build. But we have to think about how we can improve the process to bring down the cost of developing this housing. The final thing we have to think about are the inventory issues. So it's not just a matter of adding to the supply. What we need is housing that's close to workplaces and set aside for the local workforce, divorced from the international market for real estate that's driving prices beyond what local families can afford. There are some ways to do this. Favoring owner occupancy requirements, assisting first-time homebuyers can help. But we do have to ask big questions like how much of our limited housing supply we want used as short-term rentals. The answer is somewhere between 0 and 100%. And that's an important question that each county has to debate and address. And finally, we have to have a statewide conversation about how much of our limited housing stock should be used as a speculative investment vehicle. Real estate in Hawaii is an incredible investment, and some investors keep their properties vacant. And we should think about whether we're charging enough for the privilege of keeping a home empty. So that includes considering proposals like Bill 9, the empty homes tax that's being considered by the Honolulu City Council. Obviously, this is a huge issue, so that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg. But broadly speaking, we have to look at the systemic issues and work together to address those.
Sterling, just to follow on those three broad categories that you mentioned there, what has the response been like, and what do you see among those when you interact, especially with people in positions of power, to actually implement some of that? What do you feel is sort of the lowest hanging fruit among those? What are you hearing?
I think right now there's a tremendous opportunity with our next governor's administration to address some of these former Department of Education school sites. Many of these sites, because enrollment has shrunk, there's land there. Typically, these schools are close to places of employment, so there's opportunities to house the workforce, including teachers. And that's one of these obvious sort of, low-hanging fruit where it's like we have the land. It's not greenfield land, right? It's already developed. And if we can repurpose these schools, update, modernize them for the current age while also adding workforce housing, that's a no-brainer.
Zachary, what has been the feedback that you've gotten, or the interest from other young professionals or those in the community who have expressed interest since you have started this idea and this project and this organization? What has that response been like, and have you been able to use that to galvanize this effort?
Yeah, I think the short answer to that question is yes. I think my generation is one that, is particularly susceptible to, taking action. And so, I think giving them something for them to be able to latch onto, something for them to be able to go out and, have another conversation after the initial conversation that we have with them, whether it's with their parents, their friends, really is an empowering thing for them. And so I think the response has been positive. People have been really excited. I think we can easily look and see kind of the uphill battle that we face. And, us as any individual might feel that that's incredibly overwhelming and there's nothing we can, as an individual do about it. But I think we believe that, the power of a big, collective force can really, impact and bring about a lot of change. And so I think it's just a matter of continuing to empower young individuals, and then, giving them more and more opportunities to, channel that energy and sometimes that anger and that frustration into something positive.
Yeah, Sterling, building on that, you mentioned outreach and education. When you talk about that, who specifically are you looking to reach out to? You mentioned the neighborhood boards. And then on education, is it what Zach's talking about with empowering the individual? Or when you talk about education, are you talking about perhaps educating those in power about this issue? Can you speak more specifically about those two sort of branches of the organization?
Yes, so broadly speaking, it's educating both the general public, which includes our elected officials, our appointed officials, but also focusing especially on the development of youth. So one of the things we really want to equip young people with is the vocabulary that they need to participate in these discussions. A lot of times we talk about area median income, or we talk about these various technical terms, AMI ranges, and that can be alienating for a lot of young people who are being affected by this issue, but don't necessarily have the vocabulary they need to participate. So we want to basically level the playing field so that they can participate. Another thing, like you mentioned, the neighborhood boards, is to encourage young people to participate in some of these government bodies that they're just not at. So I've attended at this point 19 of the 33 neighborhood board meetings on Oahu, and even though people 40 and under make up half our state's population, you'd be hard pressed to find a board where they represent more than a quarter of the total board membership. So these boards are dominated by people who are near retirement or past retirement age, and they're the ones that are the most vocally opposed to housing. Of course, they already own their homes. So part of it is bringing the stories of young people who are affected by this issue to the fore, so we can consider what the effects are on this group and this demographic.
And to follow up on that, how do you do that? I mean, I think that when you talk about the demographics at these neighborhood boards, who knows what those boards will look like in 10 years from now, and if they'll be as relevant because of a lack of participation. How do you encourage this younger generation to be involved in that? And if not, is there any recommendation on how things structurally can change to encourage more involvement?
Yes, one of the most important things that our organization is trying to do is just to raise awareness of the variety of ways that people can get engaged civically. So it's much beyond just voting. The neighborhood boards are one of those opportunities where, I'll be honest, when I was in high school, when I was in college, I didn't know that the neighborhood boards existed. I didn't know about the role that they played in the community. No one ever told me that. And so when we work with university students, with young professionals, part of what we're trying to do is say, like, look, if you want to get involved in your community and make a difference and represent the voice of your generation, a neighborhood board is a perfect place for engagement. So we have a goal to make sure that on each of the 33 neighborhood boards, we have adequate youth representation. And that means at least getting, 2 or 3 young people onto these boards, but ideally getting a much more representative sample of the community, so that when our elected officials, they turn out to these board members, so the governor sends a representative, the mayor sends a representative, state senators and representatives and council members all send representatives, and they listen to the community concerns at these boards. And if young people are not there, if they're not present to have their voices heard, their concerns are going to be disregarded. So our biggest goal is to get young people involved in situations like that so that they can share their stories and influence the discourse that happens.
Yeah, and Zach, let's talk a little bit more about engagement. When you think about the organization as you've, come, being a co-founder of it, do you see this as who are you hoping to attract to join the organization itself, and how can people get involved?
Yeah, I think our organization kind of looks at engagement in kind of a tiered perspective. Our people who are in the throes of the housing crisis, are very limited with, their time and the amount of, quite frankly, the amount of time that they can, address to, any one particular civic issue. And so, there are going to be people who, the limits of their civic engagement are voting. There's others, as Sterling has mentioned, who will try to, bring to that, identify and bring to the next level of engagement, which might be a neighborhood board or, going out and speaking on our behalf. And I think ultimately, right, we're trying to develop youth leaders in whatever shape that they may ultimately take. And so really just, there's not anything too small that you can do for this issue. And then if you want to, run with it for, the next 10 years and join us and along every step of the way, we'd gladly bring you into the fold. And so in terms of how you can learn more about our organization, and stay involved in the long term, we have a website that you can check out and join the newsletter for. It's hawaiisfuture.org/join. We also have social media at Hawaii's Future to follow kind of along any initiatives or projects that we're doing.
Sterling, I want to circle back on the housing issue that we face, and there have been numerous proposals that have been suggested by legislators. We know that state senators like Stanley Chang has really made this one of his issues and has put forth a number of different proposals on the table, as has other lawmakers and legislators. Have there been any conversations with these lawmakers that you folks have been engaged in? And is there any proposal that has been suggested, maybe did not pass through the legislative body this past year, but things that you believe are the next steps to kind of help in this process?
Sure. So we have had the privilege of having conversations with elected officials like Senator Stanley Chang, who you just mentioned. Instead of highlighting what didn't get done this session, I do want to highlight 2 things that I think are really important developments. So The first thing is historic levels of funding for the Department of Hawaiian Homelands is a good thing because we have to ensure that Native Hawaiians have homes. And if we're thinking about how can we ensure that homes go to local people, DHHL is one of the best vehicles for that, because every person who gets a DHHL home is someone who has a historic tie to this place. A second thing that happened was there was able to be an appropriation of more than $100 million for the development of workforce housing between the 60% and 100% area median income range through the HHFDC, the Hawaii Housing Finance and Development Corporation. That's a big step in moving toward addressing workforce housing needs. In the long run, though, one thing that we're hoping is that we can build a broad middle class movement, businesses, labor unions, trade groups, nonprofits, to sign on in support of a workforce housing pledge to encourage our legislators to consider this issue, to consider, in addition to looking at houselessness and low-income housing issues, to consider the whole spectrum of housing and make sure that there are options for families at every one of those levels. So we're hoping that groups want to sign on to our Middle Movement Housing Pledge. And for those that are interested, they can always email me at sterling@hawaiisfuture.org.
Sterling, we heard a little bit from Zach a little bit earlier about how he came to this issue and how it affects him personally, but I'd love to get your backstory a little bit so people can connect in that way as well. You know, I know from reading your columns over at Civil Beat that you worked as a teacher before taking the helm of this organization. So tell us a little bit about why you feel so passionately about this issue.
Sure. So I am a public school graduate. I graduated from Roosevelt High School. I went on to the University of Hawaii, matriculating through the community college system. And every year since graduating, I've watched more and more of my classmates leave. And when I ask them why they're leaving the state, housing is one of the major reasons why. And as I enter my 30s and I think and look forward in the next few years to settling down, getting married, starting a family, raising children, I look forward 20 years and I think, will my children be able to call Hawaii home? And I look forward further and ask, will my grandchildren be able to call Hawaii home? And I'm worried by what I see. And so there's an opportunity, I think, with Housing Hawaii's Future to impact this issue and hopefully create the conditions where local families don't need to be divided and create a sustainable Hawaii where our children and our grandchildren can afford to stay here.
You know, Zachary, over the pandemic, there were a number of interesting programs that were put together to bring, at that time, just people to the islands. And a lot of it, you know, programs like Movers and Shakas that provided a housing and an opportunity for people who wanted to work remotely to work and live here for that time being. Is there any other sort of programs or anything, concepts and programs that you folks may be thinking of that may engage those who currently live on the mainland to get them in and give them an opportunity to come home?
Yeah, I think everyone's individual decision of, you know, where they want to live and what life that, you know, what's a good life for them is a very personal decision, right? And so I think we can try our best to create, you know, general systems that make that process easier. But, you know, housing is one of many pieces that factor into a big decision. And so we think of housing as a very interconnected issue. You know, whether that's to, you know, having a strong and skilled workforce, you know, having a non-aging population and, you know, reversing the brain drain. And so I think it's just a matter of keeping young people civically engaged. Like, I think the From Hawaii for Hawaii Club Challenge is a great example of one such initiative that we're trying to do, because we know that, you know, going away to college, you can feel somewhat separated from the islands, and you meet people from all over the world, and yet somehow every time I talk to my high school friends, they envision a life for themselves here on the islands. And I don't really hear that or feel that way about, you know, any other place where, you know, I may have made friends from those places. And so, you know, really leveraging that connection that we have to this, you know, special place that we all get to call home. And, you know, not taking that for granted by any means.
We are almost out of, oh, sorry, please go ahead, Sterling.
If I could just add briefly, you know, we really hope that this diaspora gets involved. During the pandemic, we've learned that Despite distance, people can participate civically. And the voices of people who've had to leave Hawaii because they couldn't afford to stay are some of the most important to include in the conversation and some of the most impactful. So we're hoping that Housing Hawaii's Future can be a way not only to engage the diaspora of students that are away on the continent, but also families who've had to leave our state and who have stories to tell that are important for our decision makers to hear.
We are almost out of time. Zach, I want to give both of you an opportunity just to give a final thought this morning, particularly for those who may be watching who don't feel like they have a dog in this fight, you know, why this matters to them. If you're not a young person trying to buy your first home, why you should care about this issue, and then again, how to get engaged. Zach, we'll start with you, and then Sterling, if we could hear from you.
Sure. I think, you know, it's easy to look at housing and say, you know, once I've figured out my housing situation, I'm out of the fight, right? I have no responsibility left to this issue. And so, you know, why should I care? And I think that's a kind of a natural reaction to have, but we really like to push back on that issue because, you know, we look at the crisis, you know, having a lot of trickle-on effects. And so one of those is the impact it has on our society. And so broadly speaking, we look at that as our community and the culture, the unique culture that we've created here. And so, you know, we've already started to feel that a little bit with, you know, many displaced households already moving to the mainland and other places around the world. And then specifically just kind of imagining it as an impact on an individual family. I think any grandparent or parent, you know, would want their child or their grandchild to have the opportunity at least, you know, to come home. So that, you know, if they were to have kids, that they can be around their grandparents, that they can send their kids to the same schools that they went to get a similar experience, you know, one that shapes them to be the person that they are. You know, I owe a lot of where, you know, my beliefs and my values to Hawaii and the places that you know, that shaped me. And so we want to just have that opportunity. And so one kind of image that we like to throw out there is that, you know, the effects of this are really slow, but I think what we don't want is to, you know, you go to the same family parties every year and, you know, you're beginning to see less and less of your family members there. And that's kind of what we want to avoid at all costs.
Great illustration there. Sterling, final thought from you.
Yeah, so Zach touched on the heartstrings. Just thinking about if we want to create a sustainable economy with renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, we need a skilled workforce. And our essential workers in agriculture, healthcare, hospitality, education, civil service, the trades, they need housing. As our population ages, we have a nursing shortage in our state. We're not able to attract the healthcare professionals we need. And this is also for the people who are engaged in helping our least fortunate disadvantaged communities, where our nonprofit service providers, our social workers, they're members of the middle class. And we as a society will not be able to help the least fortunate if we don't take care of that middle class. So the housing issue is something that spans the gamut of people in our community, and it's something we have to address.
Okay. Zachary Yamada and Sterling Higa, both of Housing Hawaii's Future. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Ryan, you know, as you noted throughout our conversation, we hear a lot about this because we've spoken so much to people who are running for office and people who are currently in office. Affordable housing comes up again and again, but this group, we wanted to highlight what they're doing because they're really taking a different approach. That idea of encouraging young people to get on those neighborhood boards and to become part of the decision-making process. And then some specifics that Sterling laid out of what could happen. This idea of turning some of the public education properties into housing is something that we've heard bandied about a bit, but not with a lot of specifics in the way that he laid out this morning.
And really laying that foundation for importance and stressing the importance of the middle class and helping to grow that sector of our economy, as well as just the services that are provided through these affordable housing options, of noting that it is important that housing is made available for those who are homeless or houseless, and finding those opportunities to get people off the streets as homelessness continues to be a major issue here in the state, but also focusing on the impact that that has on the middle class and the supply and demand efforts there, which ultimately lead people to leave the islands. But looking at this more from a broader perspective, beyond just a housing shortage, but also just the brain drain that we're seeing with so many people leaving the islands for better opportunities on the mainland that was really highlighted during the pandemic.
Yeah, so the whole idea being that even if you have your housing situation figured out, as Zach noted there, this still does affect you. And that illustration, that idea that you go to the family potluck year after year and fewer family members are there, that is something that none of us want. So we appreciate both of them being here this morning, a very interesting conversation, and great to spotlight something different. On Friday, a guest that we have invited now for quite a long time, finally joining us, someone from the Navy, Rear Admiral Dean Vanderlei, will be joining us to talk about Red Hill. He has an engineering background and is going to be talking a lot about the testing that they are currently doing, the monitoring wells, what they've been able to figure out. He's limited, we want to say from the start, in the full scope of what he can talk about. He's not going to tell us exactly how they're going to drain the tanks. That is still being worked out, but he will tell us about what is being done right now on the ground when it comes to monitoring the effects of the fuel leak and making sure that the water is safe, and answering your questions on Red Hill. So please do join us on Friday at 10:30. It's a conversation we've been wanting to have for some time.
Yeah, while his information may be limited, I think that it is a great opportunity for us to finally engage with someone from the military to hear some of the efforts that are underway right now as we continue to talk about Red Hill and its impact in our community. We look forward to that conversation. We thank you for being a part of this morning's conversation, and we'll see you right back here on Friday at 10:30 for another episode of Spotlight Hawaii. Aloha.
Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.